Max Verstappen carved through the Brazilian Grand Prix field like it was a practice session. Pit lane start to podium finish, one of the most spectacular recovery drives of the season. Everyone celebrated the spectacle, but while fans were applauding Verstappen's brilliance, McLaren was asking a very different question. Did Red Bull just cheat the cost cap, not cheating in the traditional sense? This isn't about illegal parts or technical violations. This is about Red Bull potentially exploiting a massive regulatory loophole that could give them a free performance upgrade without it counting against their budget. And if McLaren is right about how the rules work, what Red Bull did in Brazil should be impossible. Yet they did it anyway. In broad daylight, with complete transparency. So either Red Bull found the perfect loophole, or they're about to face serious financial consequences that could impact the championship fight. Brazil started as a nightmare for Red Bull. For the first time since the 2006 Japanese Grand Prix, both Red Bull cars were knocked out in Q1. Max Verstappen, who had never failed to reach Q2 on pure pace alone in his entire F1 career, qualified 16th. It was a disaster. And Red Bull knew they needed something drastic. After qualifying, they pulled Verstappen's car out of Parc Fermé and completely changed the setup. New floor configuration, different ride height, aggressive changes, trying to find performance for race day. But they didn't stop there. Red Bull fitted an entirely new Honda power unit to Verstappen's car. And when I say entirely new, I mean everything. 5th ICE, 5th turbocharger, 5th MGU-K, 5th MGU-H, 3rd battery, 3rd control electronics. F1 regulations only allow 4 of each component per season. Going beyond that allocation normally triggers grid penalties. But since Verstappen was already starting from the pit lane due to the setup changes, the penalty didn't matter. Red Bull got what appeared to be a free performance upgrade without any additional punishment. And that's exactly what caught McLaren's attention. Verstappen was flying on Sunday. He carved through the field with pace that looked miles better than his qualifying performance. Passed car after car, fought his way onto the podium, finished just 10 seconds behind race winner Lando Norris, despite starting from the pit lane and picking up an early puncture. Red Bull team principal Laurent Mekies admitted they were on schedule to finish the year without needing the change, but took the opportunity mainly because we wanted to change the car. Read that again. They didn't need it for reliability. They weren't facing an emergency. They just wanted the performance boost. It's always good to fit a new engine, Mekies told media. That statement confirms this wasn't a reliability issue. It was a pure performance choice. And that's the problem. Andrea Stella didn't waste time raising the issue. These kind of power unit changes challenge the regulations. I will be interested in understanding if the cost of this engine now goes in the cost cap or not. Here's McLaren's position. If the engine was changed for performance reasons, it should go in the cost cap. And here's why this matters. F1's cost cap regulations state that the maximum power unit supply price of $15 million can be exempt from the cost cap, although additional power unit components beyond the allowance can be subject to additional charges. The key question is whether those extra charges apply when a team voluntarily chooses a new engine for performance versus being forced to change it due to reliability failure. According to McLaren's understanding, there's a clear distinction. Reliability issue. Emergency engine changes shouldn't count against the cost cap. It wouldn't be fair to punish teams financially for something outside their control. Performance choice. Voluntary engine swaps purely for performance should fall under the cost cap. Otherwise, what stops teams from throwing fresh engines into cars whenever they're already facing penalties? Stella made it explicit. This is also one reason why we wouldn't do it, because it would end up in the cost cap. That's the bombshell. McLaren is openly stating they would do exactly what Red Bull did, but they believe it would count against their budget. So either McLaren is wrong about the rules, or Red Bull just found a massive loophole. Here's the uncomfortable truth about F1's cost cap regulations. This area isn't clearly defined in the published rulebook. Instead, it falls under understandings between teams and the FIA. guidelines agreed upon behind closed doors, but not written down in black and white for everyone to see. That creates a grey area. And in Formula One, grey areas are where the most interesting battles happen. Some teams, including McLaren, believe that if an extra power unit is used because of genuine reliability concerns, it should not have cost cap consequences. However, if a team voluntarily opts for an engine swap for pure performance reasons, then that should fall under the cost cap. The thinking is simple. Having a cost implication deters teams from repeatedly throwing fresh power units onto a car just to gain a few tenths of a second. Red Bull's position seems to be that since Verstappen was already starting from the pit lane, taking a new engine made perfect sense. They were losing track position anyway, so why not maximise performance? From their perspective, it's smart strategy. McLaren's position is that the reason for the engine change matters. Performance upgrades should count toward the budget. Otherwise, teams will game the system every time a driver faces a penalty. There's another layer to this controversy. How much performance does a new engine actually deliver in modern F1? Stella offered an interesting perspective. I don't know how this works for Honda, but in general, these engines, they don't exhibit much degradation with mileage. If modern turbo-hybrid engines don't degrade significantly, maybe Verstappen's new engine wasn't the major factor. Maybe the bigger contributors were the setup changes and cooler race temperatures. But even if the engine only provided a small benefit, it still matters. In Formula One, races are won and lost by tenths of a second. Every advantage counts. And if Red Bull got that advantage without it counting toward their cost cap, that's a competitive problem for their rivals. Verstappen's recovery drive was spectacular, but how his pace was weighted between setup changes and the new engine is a fascinating topic, as multiple analysts noted. The truth is probably a combination of everything working together: better setup, fresh engine, cooler conditions, and Verstappen's exceptional driving skill. Right now, we're waiting for FIA clarification. McLaren is seeking answers from the FIA about whether Verstappen's fresh engine swap will come out of Red Bull's cost cap allocation. There's no indication Red Bull is close to violating the cost cap limit for 2025. Financial data isn't public, and compliance is only reviewed at season's end. But this isn't about whether Red Bull will breach the cap. It's about setting a precedent. If the FIA rules that performance-based engine changes don't count toward the cost cap, it opens the door for exploitation. Anytime a driver faces a penalty or starts from the back, teams could take a fresh engine for free. That fundamentally undermines the purpose of both the component limits and the cost cap. If the FIA rules they do count toward the cap, it clarifies the regulations and prevents teams from gaming the system. It also means Red Bull will have to account for Verstappen's new power unit in their end-of-year budget calculations. This controversy highlights a fundamental issue in modern Formula One. The cost cap regulations are still relatively new, and there are areas where the rules aren't as clear as they should be. McLaren's decision to raise this question publicly is significant. They're not accusing Red Bull of cheating, they're asking for clarity on how the rules work. And in a championship battle this tight, that's not just fair, it's necessary. For Red Bull, this was smart racing. They saw an opportunity to improve their car's performance without additional penalty, and they took it. Whether it counts toward the cost cap or not, it was a calculated decision that helped Verstappen secure a crucial podium finish. Sky Sports' Ted Kravitz downplayed the controversy. "I've got no problem with this new engine. If it's in the cost cap or not, if people want to do a little trick to avoid that, I've got no problem with that. It's an F1 common trick." But McLaren clearly has a problem with it, and they want answers.